Hi, everybody. Thrilled to be here with you all. Anouk, do you mind sharing my putting the presentation live? Oh yeah, perfect. That's where we're. Okay. Hi, everybody. So excited to be with you here today and to be presenting on prosociality, psychological safety, and the loneliness epidemic at work. It's a topic that's close to my heart, close to home, having created Wellbeing to help tackle that problem. So yeah, very excited to be here today. I'm going to ask if folks have feedback to or want to have a conversation with us to use the chat. I'm actually going to ask for certain times to like pull or to like put your hand up. So feel free to use the chat for that purpose too. You can react with an emoji, thumbs up, a +1, whatever. You'll see as we're going through where there's opportunities for that. I always appreciate that feedback because it just helps us make sure that we're all following along and make sure that I'm talking to points that are relevant to all of you. Yeah, I'll get started. As the chat implies there, and as my title, my name is listed there, but I am Sam, and I'm the CEO of Wellbeing, which is a pro-social well-being companion application. Very obvious why I'm talking to you about this today. Just quickly, this orb is central to what Wellbeing is, and it represents how the Wellbeing team as a team is doing right now. At the simplest level, we use it to create emotional context and visibility at our company. We look at it during stand-ups, and it gives us this common framework to talk about our emotions, in this case, in the form of colors. And we can create kind of the psychological safe environment. So folks on the team use this to understand each other, but also to extend that and engage with themselves and understand their own well-being, their loved ones' well-being, and their other communities outside of the Wellbeing employee team's well-being. You can see that there's some red here, there's some green here, there's some yellow here. Yellow being kind of high energy, positive attitude, green being low energy, positive attitude, and red being more an attitude that is typically on the lower attitude side and something that's very high energy, like angry or frustrated. So you can see that there's a mix of emotions at Wellbeing right now. I like to start there. So just by a raise of hands, who feels like they could define the word pro-social? It's kind of this word that is pretty new and not always. It's not always recognizable. So I haven't seen it used a lot so far. So I'm just curious who feels like they could. I'm not going to ask you to do it, but who feels like they could define the word pro-social or knows what pro-social means? Would you be willing to raise your virtual hand if you feel like you can? I'll give it a second. And if not, no problem. That's actually probably a great thing if you feel like you can't define it. Lisa, awesome. Great. So it sounds like there's a few people that can define it, but I'm going to start with the definition just to help ground us. So pro-social this is how we define it. It's intended to help or benefit another person or group. So it's social behavior that's positive in nature. It's the opposite of what social media makes you do. So my vision in these next 10, 20 minutes is to understand how encouraging pro-social behavior in the workplace is really the key to creating flourishing, productive workplaces. And we'll talk about the highest level problems and trends we are seeing in society that we feel are relevant here, how these challenges present themselves in the workplace, and how loneliness has become really a corporate problem. And ultimately, why prosociality is the key that is missing in these well-being programs today to make them actually work. And in the context of work, especially remote work, why this is so important. We'll talk about some of the solutions that we can employ to create pro-social behavior in the workplace, to create ultimately corporate success and improve both performance and employee well-being. And I'll talk about Wellbeing a little bit and introduce the concept, but most of this will be on the problem and understanding how we can introduce more pro-social behavior in the workplace, absent any specific technology. So I hope you leave with a new perspective on being social and emotional at work and why these are essential behaviors to foster in flourishing workplaces, and why we should be talking about them more. So at the highest level, the problem that Upbeing was built to solve was that we don't understand our well-being individually nor as a society, and there's a ton of evidence to prove this. We're the most interconnected we've ever been, and we're the most disconnected we've ever been from a meaningful perspective. Right? We spend more time on social media and have more virtual connections than we've ever had before. We spend less time socializing in a meaningful ways and communicating in meaningful ways with the people in our lives. And the loneliness epidemic costs employers 154 billion annually, and this stat is from 2022, so it's continued to grow since then. And this is just based on absenteeism and things like that. It's not actually taking in the cost of like presenteeism and other elements. Yes, that data did include socializing with the family. According to the US, a lot of people live alone and don't socialize with a partner or family at all. We also have more access to mental health care, but we feel worse than we ever have before. So more people are in therapy, more people are getting access to health care, but more people are reporting, less people are reporting excellent mental health care. And this is the rate of change on those two statistics from the beginning of the 2000s to just past 2020 till 2021. So we've really reached this peak therapy experience where the US spends $280 billion on mental health services in 2020. It isn't a stigma problem anymore. I mean, there is still problems with stigma, don't get me wrong, but that isn't what's driving these outcomes, right? There are a lot of people in therapy, there are a lot of people talking about mental health, but still reporting negative mental health. We believe at Upbeing that it's an engagement problem, that we aren't motivated to engage with our well-being regularly. And in our world of clicks and notifications and scrolls, and our attention is constantly taken away from us. So it becomes really hard to engage with our well-being in that context where, other people are constantly trying to grab our attention. So this is the highest level problem. This is really the problem that we see in society. And I'll ask you a few questions just to make this maybe hit home a little deeper for you. How many people do you know, and you don't have to answer this in the chat here, but do you yourself, or how many people do you know, spend more time like actively caring for your own well-being, like doing meditation, journaling, some sort of exercise like that, versus the time you spend scrolling on social media? Just think of those, time spent on those two things, those two activities, and compare the difference there. And is that optimal? Do you think that's optimal for you? So I want you to just reflect for a second on that. And if that question, doesn't sit well, then maybe this one does. How many people do you know that spend 5 to 10 minutes a day actively caring for their own well-being? We all know, that person that has a really great, meditation or journaling practice. But I would imagine that this is the minority of people that that spend 5 to 10 minutes a day, like actively caring for their well-being. It's probably pretty few people. Again, feel free to use the group chat, but for these questions, it's a little harder to answer there. So Upbeing is built, and we'll talk about this later, but what we've done as a software is we've actually created a way for people to engage with their well-being. And it's about being social, but it's not social media. We'll talk about this in more detail a little bit later. Yeah, it's a great point, Florian. Thanks for including that in the chat. So Upbeing was initially released as an application just for individuals. And we started interviewing employers and employment partners because they started approaching us and saying, hey, we'd like to add this concept into the workplace, this concept of social, but not social media. And they articulated to us a few common problems that they were experiencing. And I want to see, if these problems resonate with you, because this is what we heard from peers of yours. The first is, so I'll ask a question to prime the first problem set that we've identified. And the question is, who has a well-being program at their organization? So if you just put your hand up, like there's a formal well-being program at your organization, there's formal supports for well-being at your organization. If you could do a +1 or a hand up here to help me just get a sense of that. And if you don't, don't put it in. Cool. That's awesome. Lots of activities. Cool. Yeah, so it sounds like people do generally have well-being programs, and most organizations do, right? Lots of thumbs up. So, given that you guys have a well-being program, who finds that these well-being programs are actually effective at addressing your personal mental health challenges? So how many people have used the program successfully to address a challenge that they've had with their mental health and had that actually help you? So again, do kind of a yes here. Maybe say yes if they have found it effective, and if you haven't, say no. That would be really helpful. I'll wait another minute here, but awesome. Yes. Okay. Awesome. That's great, Jane. More about balance and fixing the situation. Cool. Yeah. No. Awesome. Yeah. So great. There's some mixed feedback. I'll continue talking, and I'm sure some other people will bring it in. But cool. Yeah. Lots of no's, which is kind of what we heard in the market too. So first, the first problem is that many employers articulated that their well-being program was not having the results they wanted. They all recognized that well-being was essential. Well-being is really important in high-performing teams. There's tons of evidence towards that. And employees spoke loudly and clearly that they needed well-being support, right? When they talked to employees, when they surveyed employees, that was an important benefit. But when they actually implemented these programs, very often they flopped. They deeply felt the conflict between these 2 points of research, which is companies with higher level of well-being perform fundamentally better. But those programs designed to improve your company's well-being are not effectively doing that the vast majority of their time. So this was the first problem we saw, and that employers articulated to us when they were approaching to us about Upbeing. So again, another poll here: who works remotely? And we'll go into problem 2. Just for the sake of time, I'm going to keep moving through, but feel free to answer this question. If you work remotely, give us a +1 in the chat there. Give us a thumbs up. And the second problem relates to remote workers. It affects non-remote workers too, but it affects remote workers a lot. So the second problem, as they articulated it in anonymous, as employees articulated in anonymous surveys, that employees would feel like they're really feeling a lot of loneliness, and there was a lot of burnout among team members from this level of loneliness. But when employers tried to offer programs to support employees directly and arm their managers to have conversations with employees often would not use these programs, or they wouldn't even reveal in a non-anonymous setting that they weren't feeling good. And this was especially true among remote first teams, where colleagues were kind of a box on the screen. And it was also true with frontline and emergency workers like doctors and firefighters, where a negative mental health assessment may actually affect your fitness for duty. So we see this again, this kind of dichotomy where, yes, according to the data, employees aren't doing well. But when you actually try to action that and make change, it's really challenging, because employees aren't using that, and there isn't that psychological safety there to address those challenges. And the research backs this up. 57% of physicians are concerned for their job if they seek mental health treatment. This is a US statistic, not a Canadian statistic. I'm sure it's actually probably worse in Canada. And then 61% of workers feel lonely. And that's up from 50% before COVID. Final question here is, who loves employee engagement surveys? And I'm probably talking to a bunch of people who are into AHR, so I'm sure we all love it. But most employees, I find, do not love employee engagement surveys. They end up feeling a little bit like Samuel L. Jackson here. because employers articulated this third gap that they have in their HR tools today, this third problem, which was a gap in their HR tools. And they said that their HR solutions were really great at measuring and assessing, like in providing really good information back to the people and culture team. And and they were even good in helping employees within the context of like formal programs like mentorship, therapy, or coaching, where you had the kind of a formal program and a formal way of enacting that program. But when it came to ongoing maintenance, like the everyday stuff and increasing psychological safety, increasing emotional visibility, increasing peer employee connection among teams, that's where their tools fell short. HR tools often help assess and measure culture as opposed to helping you proactively build culture. And as a result, people feel like Samuel L. Jackson. So, we have a belief at Upbeing where we should really love our well-being tools. That's like the whole point, to create meaning and happiness at work, right? So the tools themselves should do that. They shouldn't just measure and assess. So we'll talk about this in a little bit more detail. So lots of problems that exist, and we believe that the solution is actually pretty simple. Not easy, but simple, in the context of adding prosociality, adding social connection at work. We think that is the key solution that can make a little bit of a change and start moving people up from whatever their baseline is every single day. So we all know that in the context of outside of work, in the context of everyday life, social connection is one of, if not the largest predictor of overall well-being and human flourishing. And social connection requires psychological safety and trust. It requires deep, meaningful connection. And as social media has shown us, it's less the number of connections we have and more the depth of those connections that truly matter. So social connection is built over time, through micro interactions, through ongoing engagement, through empathy. Social connection requires people to actually care about each other as people. So it's something where it requires deep, meaningful connection. This is really, really hard to create in a remote setting. And the evidence shows that pro-social behavior at work is not just like a predictor of well-being, it's the key predictor of performance on teams. So it goes beyond just how good your people are feeling. It goes towards the performance of your company. And as Simon says, so succinctly, like strong relationships are the foundation of high-performing teams. And all high-performing teams ultimately start with trust. And the last point I'll make here is that most change is really hard. Changing your clients' behaviors and changing how they treat employees is really hard to do, especially if those clients have a lot of power over your company. Changing your managers' behaviors and making them better managers is not an easy thing to do, and it takes a long time, and it takes real training. And to make work more meaningful for employees, especially work that is not necessarily inherently meaningful, like work that is administrative or work that's physical labor in nature, to try to make that work more meaningful is really challenging sometimes, right? You can do other things, but doing that type of change is really hard. But in every culture, in every workplace, creating prosociality, creating more connection among teams, creating psychological safety, creating visibility on emotions, that's something that will improve every single team. That's something that will help people feel belonging, regardless of everything else that's going on around them. And I believe it's the thing that's missing most in our organizations today. So here's some statements, and I think we can all agree that these are true. Everything is better when we have a friend. Everything is better when we have empathy, and everything is better when we care about one another. And all these statements remain true at work. The key predictors of happiness in real life and as individuals are the key predictors of happiness at work. Everything is better when we have a friend at work. Everything is better when we have empathy and people have empathy for us at work. Everything is better when we care about one another at work. And you can create this. This isn't something that just like happens. This isn't something where you hire great people. I mean, yes, hiring great people is important, but you can also create this proactively every single day. Through pro-social behaviors through creating those pro-social behaviors at work and leading with in a pro-social way. So I'll quickly introduce Upbeing to you and how our solution helps create pro-social organizational cultures. And I'll try to do this quickly and leave time for any questions and discussion. Upbeing is a social application. It's a social well-being companion app, but it is not social media. We don't share media on our platform. We have emotions that people share with one another transparently and with the communities they are part of anonymously. We don't have a feed that people endlessly scroll. We have an orbit that's limited in nature and where you can check in on what really matters, your loved ones, your 5 to 10 people that matter most to you. And you can also check in on your community's well-being quickly and easily. We don't have groups at Upbeing where you can join transactionally. That's not what it's for. We have communities that people are meant to find belonging in and to find psychological safety and connection within, to feel like they're seen, but not necessarily feel like they're seen as an individual, but seen as part of a group, right? Their emotions are expressed as part of that group and they're able to relate to that group. So that is a community for us. It's not just a transactional group. And we don't monetize attention. We use data to make sense of well-being for you as an individual, for your loved ones, for your clinicians and supporters, and for the communities you are part of, and for society as a whole. Our goal is insight, not monetizing attention. You can try it out for free. It can be implemented in one of your teams for 10 minutes. And I just don't mean free for today. It's free forever. The application is a completely free mobile application. It's a lot like a Strava group or a message thread, right? These are things that you can add to the Upbeing is something you can add to the workplace, just like you could add, practices of every stand-up sharing emotions, right? Or just like you could add creating a buddy system at work, right? These is things that you can add without a bunch of corporate approval. There's no corporate data that goes into Upbeing. We've created as an individual app, and we've realized that we need to be in organizations because that has so much impact on individuals' well-being. So like we have retailers using it in the back room to create continuously shared emotional context. This was really helpful during Black Friday, and you could get a pulse on how that team was feeling. It was really helpful for the manager. Developers use it in stand-up. We've had a few cases of this where development teams are using it in stand-up to create peer support and to create peer and as part of peer coding programs. And consultants use it within like project teams where their communities are separate projects and they're able to manage the emotional day-to-day emotional pulse of those teams through Upbeing. I won't go over this, but over time you can incorporate it into your HR stack more holistically. And there's a bunch of integrations that go along with that. And it will have more tangible effects on increasing utilization in EAPs, understanding trend data and well-being. Will never reveal personal information, but understanding overall community trend data and overall trend data for your organization. And obviously we can integrate it into programs and have separate portals for coaches and therapists and peer support and mentorship and training that they can access in a more confidential way with individuals directly if they provide that permission. That's it. That's what I wanted to talk about today. I really wanted to just introduce this concept. I want you to leave with this idea that prosociality is really, really important in your organization, and fostering a pro-social environment in your organization is something that you can do very easily tomorrow and will have a net benefit. Please ask any questions you have in the chat here. I'd love to address them. Florian, I'm reading your question right now. I'm working in a tiny organization where we're 3. Yeah, would that still be real? I find it really hard to find well-being initiatives that work for tiny teams. That's a great question, Florian. So I have a team of 12 that's on Upbeing, and that includes like part-time folks. So it's not like team of 8 full-time. So we're not that much larger than you. And there's 2 levels of Upbeing. So there's communities, and there's your direct inner orbit, who you connect with individually. So I'll just go back to that for a second. So there's the inner orbit, right, which are individuals, right? In this case, Emily, Liam, and Isabella. And then there's your outer orbit, which are like your basketball team, your design team, the city of Toronto, UCLA, things like that. So there's 2 different levels of that. In the context of your inner orbit, if you have a really close relationship and there's only 3 team members, like my co-founder is in my inner orbit, my lead developer is in my inner orbit, and that's because I have a really close relationship to them. And they're more than just people, they're friends, right? So this gives me this 2-way emotional context, and it's actually emotional vulnerability, not just emotional visibility at that stage. So potentially that's something you can utilize. You could all add each other, and it's a small enough group where you can create that psychological safety and be really transparent. Or you could just create a community with all of you. And I agree, like it's a community of 3 is a little bit small. So maybe that's a direct connection in Upbeing. I would challenge you though, like absent Upbeing and absent that, like I challenge you to think about how you can do that as part of like your normal practices. So I mentioned this earlier, but if you have a stand-up, with or without Upbeing, how do you talk about emotions? How do you talk about psychological safety? How do you talk about bringing that into the conversation and treating people where they're at for that day, right? How do you create practices in Slack virtually, let's say, where people share how they're feeling? If they're not, in Upbeing's case, you could share your orb, but potentially there's other things you can share, right? How do you create stories around well-being and leave space for that in that context, right? Like good or bad, right? So I would argue that, especially if you're the leader of that team, creating that psychological safety is really important, and there's lots you can do to do that. Anouk, I see you're coming on. Do you mind if I answer this last question here? Oh, there's 2 more.
And I can just say, if you want to, Sam, you can stay in the chat and answer things by chat too. So this doesn't have to be like the only.
That's what I'll do then. I'll just say one little comment here because there's a lot of remote questions. So remote employees this is especially true with remotes. My team is entirely remote. Upbeing is entirely remote. And we do this as a team and we care for each other as a team. So I'll give you another example. I found out that one of my employees, because I share our emotions together, was doing really, really poorly because they went through a breakup. This was years ago. Not years ago, but a year ago. I was able to send them a gift bag thing, which was just really an Uber. Like I ordered from Uber to their house, something, and it just made their day a little brighter, right? Like that is a pro-social behavior that comes from emotional visibility, right? Think about ways you can do things like that. There are lots you can do in a remote setting to feel combined. And it doesn't mean you all have to gather on a virtual session and play a game together at the end of the day. Like that is not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about genuine pro-social activities. Anouk, I'll let you finish off now. Sorry.
This is honestly great. And I think after this session, I'm going to sign up the Future of Good team because we're a hybrid team. So I feel like the folks who are in the office, I have a very strong idea of how they're doing because like you said, we chat, we connect, we, go out for lunch if we can. But we have quite a few remote workers and that's always a challenge. And it's interesting too, because in one of our workshops, we talked about, there was this exercise of like, what do you do when you're not feeling good? And it was intense because a lot of our teammates said, I withdraw, like I go quiet. And if you're online, like that person just disappears. So anyways, just to say that I really enjoyed this and I hope to use it. And we'll, I'm sure we'll stay in touch over that. So anyway, Sam, thank you very much for
My pleasure. No, that's great. That was a great story and you get it. So thanks so much.
Yeah.